Welcome everyone. My name is David Evans. I'm the chair of the Hazardous Industries Group for IOSH, and on behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome you all today. We have a very interesting speaker joining us, but before I introduce him, just a couple of words on what the group is up to and what's happening in the world of major hazards. A couple of notices. One that came to my attention is the work that Lord Toby Harris has been doing for the government and the National Preparedness Commission, which is going to result in significant changes to the Civil Contingencies Act, and that's well worth looking out for. And in particular, his focus on organizational and strategic resilience, challenging governments about how resilient they should become. Anybody who's following the Brembo Tower inquiry will have seen that the reports on the response capability of the London Fire Brigade and the issues there are also going to feed forward into a lot of lessons we can take out of that incident and apply into major hazards areas. As a result, we're going to try and focus in the autumn on a series of webinars that are more technically focused, so keep an eye open for that. And also the committee's working with the Offshore Industries Group on a collaborative conference, a virtual as well as face-to-face conference that we hope to be launched in first quarter of next year in 2023. That looks like an exciting program. And we're also talking to the branch in Oman about a joint collaborative webinar with them. So hopefully as we run through the summer and move forward, there's going to be quite a lot happening. Again, we'd always welcome people who are interested in helping the committee or serving in the committee to join us. And a final reminder, don't forget to connect with LinkedIn and Twitter. But you didn't join today to listen to me, so I'd like to go across to Peter Davidson, and we're going to look at seizing the opportunities for change in the management of catastrophic risks. Now, Peter, who's an exceedingly busy man, he's executive director of Tank Storage Association, represents the interests of 50 companies, 300 terminals, a really significant background in process hazards and process safety. And he's responsible for all aspects of advocacy and the lobbying on behalf of the Tank Storage Association and its members. But he goes beyond that because they're actively involved in promoting process safety leadership and helping, obviously, the members. But they're also, Peter's in close collaboration with governments, regulators, and leading cross-industry committees. Prior to joining the Tank Storage Association, Peter was Director of Safety, Commercial and Projects at the UK Petroleum Industry Association. And today he's here not just going to introduce the work that he does and what's of interest to the TSA, but also the work that's involved in what's called the Process Safety Pool. And I'm not going to take away the highlights of this talk there. But again, this is an organization I recommend you monitor because it publishes some very, very good information, incidents reports and analysis on process. So Peter, it's over to you, and I'm going to sit back and listen to what I know is going to be a very entertaining and informative webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. Hopefully everybody can hear me. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, David, and the IOSH team for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all today. Excuse me, as David has already mentioned, my main focus of the presentation this morning is going to be on the work of something called the Process Safety Forum. But just before I get on to that, I want to give you a little bit more about what my organisation does, the Tank Storage Association. David's already given us a fantastic introduction there. So yeah, we operate over 300 terminals, or our members operate over 300 terminals across the UK and many more globally. Those terminals will range from very large import terminals, which receive ships and jetties, all the way through to secondary inland terminals and distribution depots. In all, those terminals probably have around about 11 million, 12 million cubic meters of storage capacity. And I think it's important at this stage to indicate that probably over 60% of the products that we import, store and distribute are traditional refined petroleum products such as diesel, aviation fuel and gasoline. You're probably already aware that the UK is a net importer of diesel and jet fuel, and all of those fuels come in through TSA member companies and are distributed through our secondary terminals and distribution depots. But it is also important to stress that our business is not just about hydrocarbons, because all of the chemicals, intermediate chemicals, foodstuffs, animal feeds, agricultural products such as fertilizers are also dealt with by our member companies. Anything that you can store in bulk in liquid tends to be handled by our members, who provide the logistical interface that we need to get those products to where they need to get to. As the TSA is a trade association, our primary focus is on lobbying and advocacy on behalf of our members. But that lobbying and advocacy isn't just to government and government departments. Of course, we also work very closely with our regulators, whether that's the HSE or one of the environmental agencies across the UK. And we champion our members' needs in safety, health, environment and technical matters across our members' needs and to government and those regulators. And of course, we're ourselves an authoritative source of information and guidance on the tank storage, bulk liquid storage industry in the UK. In terms of our membership, we have different categories of members. Here we have our full members. Some of these names you'll recognise and some that you won't. So businesses like Greenergy are a very large business who are a trader. We have companies like Exelum who provide third-party storage facilities. And also agencies such as the Oil and Pipelines Agency, which provide fuels to military sites and depots across the UK. We also have associate members, which are terminal and port operators, which get directly involved in our safety and technical work. And we have associate members who are suppliers, who supply services and equipment to terminal operations. In terms of some of the statistics about our members, so revenue back from 2020 was around about 4.3 billion. We have a very small headcount in terms of a sector, only around about 4,000 to 5,000 people directly employed in the UK. And that tends to be because the nature of our business, we don't need a very large number of people to run a terminal because of the high reliance on automation. I've already mentioned the storage capacity around about 11 to 12 million. And the number of terminals, around about 302 our members operate. But it's important to stress there that around about 70, 75 of those terminals are COMA. And it's also important to say that of those COMA terminals, around about 22 or 23 are designated as critical national infrastructure by the UK government because of the importance that they have in the energy infrastructure in the UK. If you want to find out more about the Tank Storage Association, please look at our website. We also publish a free annual review and quarterly magazine called TSA Insight. And all of that information is available on our website, but you can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So let me start by talking about the history of how we came about forming the Process Safety Forum in the first place. We're all familiar with talking about events such as BP Texas City Refinery, Buncefield, and Macondo. But how often do we talk about some of those other high-profile incidents? For example, you can see three images on the screen there. The first on the left-hand side is the Alton Towers Smiler ride, which there was an incident back in 2015 which caused life-changing injuries to some of the people that were on that ride at the time. And when you look at some of the lessons that were drawn from the research that went on after the event, you could see that some of the engineers that were working on shift at that time didn't necessarily accept some of the signals that the control system was giving them. Also, a long period between when the accident happened and when the emergency services were called. At the bottom of your screen, you can see an image from the Bosley Mill explosion Again in 2015, 4 deaths occurred in that explosion. And it's deemed to be down to excessive dust that was dust levels that were due to the cause of the explosion. One on the right-hand side you may not be familiar with, but it's from Boston in the US, back from 1919, and it was called the Boston Molasses Flood that occurred. 21 people died in that incident. And the root cause was down to a storage tank collapse, possibly due to thermal expansion and very poor inspection and maintenance of those riveted sections on the tanks. So we know about the usual incidents, but how much do we actually look into some of these other incidents which could have equal relevance to us as process industries? And I think it's also important to think about sharing these experiences and these incidents from other sectors in the context of good safety leadership. Because actually good safety leadership is also about ensuring valuable lessons and knowledge can be exchanged, both between our peers that are working in our own sector, but also from those other sectors that have major accident hazard potential. And obviously it's got to be down to the boards and the chief executives and the senior management teams of our companies to ensure that information exchange takes place wherever we can. And certainly from our sector in terminal operations, but more widely in chemical and downstream oil, Buncefield was a defining moment. I'm not going to spend too much time on Buncefield because I'm sure that you're all very, very aware of exactly what happened. However, one of the things to come out of that was something called the Process Safety Leadership Group report and a series of leadership principles. And if you haven't had the opportunity to read either the PSLG report or those leadership principles, I would encourage you to do so. Just do a Google search for any of those two terms, and you will find out information about them. But really, the PSLG report and the leadership principles completely changed our relationship with how we work with regulators. And it certainly promoted greater collaboration on safety issues between companies, not just within the sectors involved in the chemical and downstream oil areas, but also much more widely through cross-sector learning. And it really highlighted the pivotal role that stakeholder groups such as trade associations, such as yourselves, IOSH, IChemE, the Energy Institute, and many others could play in making sure that those lessons were learned and distributed. And I think it's very true to say and to stress that we have not stopped this process of learning. We have not lost our focus. We continue to work every day to review, scrutinise and share lessons that become apparent to us. So moving on a little bit now to the Process Safety Forum itself. I mentioned earlier about Buncefield, but it was really Texas City and Buncefield incidents that exposed certain weaknesses. And a couple of the key points that came out of those two incidents was that leaders really need to show leadership in process safety with other sectors and externally to regulators. We can't just work in a silo mentality, just worrying about the issues that happen within terminals, for example, within bulk liquid storage or refineries within refinery operations. We need to stretch out to other sectors to learn. And it also showed that we needed to avoid complacency. You can't go around thinking, I haven't had an incident, so I don't need to do anything more. Or you can't say that we haven't had an incident in our particular sector or subsector, so I don't need to worry about doing anything else. So if we look at the Buncefield Major Investigation Board recommendations, there were 3 or 4 that were particularly relevant to addressing those challenges. And I've highlighted the key points on the screen here. So first of all, recommendation 21 says the sector should put in place arrangements to ensure a good practice in these areas, incorporating experience from other high hazard sectors. Looking at recommendations 23 and 24, the sector should set up arrangements to collate incident data on high potential incidents, but more appropriately, communicate information on risks related to their solutions and control measures to industry. And to industry means more widely across high hazard sectors as a whole. And recommendation 25 says that in particular, the sector, in this case, chemicals and downstream oil, should draw together current knowledge of major hazard events and share those amongst that sector and more widely. And really, it was because of those 4 recommendations that we established the Process Safety Forum back in 2009. And really, those first 2 bullet points that you can see on your screen explain the source of the terms of reference of what we try to do. So we aim to share best practice, high-level learning, and major incident reviews across industry sectors. We aim to identify emerging issues from other sectors and identifying issues and opportunities to share further the work that we do. The Process Safety Forum itself has been chaired since 2009, and I'm really pleased to say that it is still being chaired by somebody called Paul Thomas. Paul, if you're not aware of who he is, he's an ex-submariner. He was the Assistant Director of Reactor Safety at the Naval Reactor Test Establishment in Dounreay. And following that, he took up positions as Chairman of the Naval Nuclear Technical Safety Panel, posts within the AEA Technology as Director Engineering Projects and Director Strategic Development. More recently, British Nuclear Fuels, Director of Environment, Health, Safety and Quality. And he was, until a few years ago, on the board of the Rail Safety and Standards Board as a non-executive director. So somebody that has a huge amount of experience across several different sectors relating to safety. So is an excellent choice to chair and steer what we do as a group. In terms of membership of the Process Safety Forum, I think it's important to stress that what we try to do is we try to attract trade associations to be part of the Process Safety Forum. Why do we do that? Because they have the greatest outreach. We need to be able to make sure that our meetings are manageable and we don't have a cast of thousands attending each of our meetings, because it can be very, very difficult to progress our agenda. So what we tend to do is that we tend to invite trade associations to be a member of Process Safety Forum, and then we use those trade bodies to further communicate the work of the Process Safety Forum within their own membership. So as well as ourselves at the Tank Storage Association, we have lots of different sectors represented, which you can all see on the screen there, ranging from aerosol manufacturers, energy networks, looking at power distribution, Explosive Industries Group, which includes the firework and explosives industries. IChemE Safety Centre are members, but also yourselves at IOSH are members. So you can see quite a range of different industries represented there. And we're always on the lookout to get new members. So if you are ever aware of any sectors that could benefit from being a member of the Process Safety Forum through their representative trade body, then please get in touch. So how does the Process Safety Forum go about sharing and learning? We've published something called the Operational Guideline, which basically is an information document that tells us how we go about sharing things. As you can imagine, there is a lot of sensitivity about sharing information on incidents and near misses between companies, and we needed to make sure that we can do that in the most effective way. The other thing to consider is, as well, is that, as you can imagine, there are lots of different learnings coming out of lots of different sectors, and not all of those are going to be relevant to anyone else. Some of them are going to be very, very sector specific. So we needed a way to make sure that we could screen the information that is presented to us by our member organisations, for example, the Tank Storage Association, to make sure that the information that we put forward to the Process Safety Forum is going to be of relevance to other members and other sectors represented within the forum itself. So the operational guidance, if you like, provides us with a bit of a roadmap about how we go about doing that and screening the information that we get. And we actually publish things called learning briefs, safety alerts, knowledge exchanges, and we also carry out industry reviews of significant events where relevant. And I think what's really important is that when we're collating those safety alerts and knowledge exchanges and learning briefs, we need to make sure that the language that we use is accessible to all of the different sectors that are going to read them. I know that I use terminology when I talk to terminal operating companies and refiners that will mean something different to the offshore industry, or it will mean something different to the water industry. So what we've tried to do is to create a common language, if you like, that we can use within the Process Safety Forum and all of our publications, which help us to explain to our individual sectors through our membership what it is those lessons are and how they should be applied. And we call these things themes, and we arrange those across the usual people, plants, and process. So, for example, we might have a theme, for example, under plants called assets, plant and design, plant and equipment design. And we just give a brief description of what we mean by plant and equipment design. Another example, what do we mean by hazards and risk management systems, work control and permits? What this means is that we've collated, if you like, a standard set of terms and definitions that we can then all use to communicate lessons that are shared within the wider process safety community with our own members. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time now, if I may, just on running through a couple of the learning briefs and knowledge exchanges that we published fairly recently, just to give you an idea of the kind of information that we share and what some of these key lessons are. And the first one that I'm going to present to you is the one that you can see on the screen there, which is a learning brief on what's called an irregularity or near miss at Balham Junction, which is rail incident. And this was an important one to share as something that we call a learning brief, to highlight good practice, refresh knowledge from past incidents and relevant learning from an incident or near miss from an unrelated sector. That's very wordy, but let me go through and just explain this one. So this incident occurred back in 2019 on the 20th of April, and it involved a tamper. And for those of you that aren't familiar with rail terminology, a tamper is basically a vehicle that runs on the railways. It's used to pack ballast underneath railway tracks, so it's used for maintenance. And back in 2019, this particular tamper that you can see on the image on the screen made an unsignalled and unauthorised move of around about 600 metres, and it passed over Balham Junction, which is a junction of lots of different railway tracks, and eventually entered platform 3 at Balham Station. Why is this relevant and important? Well, because the tamper could have caused a collision with a fast-running passenger train that went through the same junction in the opposite direction only 75 seconds earlier. So this was a very, very close near miss. Now, when we looked into the reasons behind this particular issue, it was found that the incident occurred because of the boundary of an engineering possession. This is when the tamper is handed over from one area to another area. So the crossing that the tamper was supposed to make safely didn't take place. And therefore the person taking possession of the tamper had the wrong information about where it was. So that when they went on to make the move of this particular tamper, because they had control of it, it was actually in the wrong place. And that's why it caused a movement that should never have happened and nearly caused a very serious accident. Why did these things happen? Well, this is really the key to this particular learning brief. And a lot of it was down to the people that were actually on site at Balham Junction themselves carrying out the work didn't query the movements that the person in charge of the position was asking them to make, even though they thought that it could be incorrect. Bearing in mind that the person in charge was working from home that day, and they probably didn't have all of the information that they necessarily needed in order to make a safe move of this particular piece of equipment. What came through quite strongly is that one of the issues here was safety critical communications between those directly working at Balham Junction on the tamper equipment and the person in charge of the possession did not take place very well. And when we looked into it a little bit more closely, we actually found that staff were embarrassed to use some of the terminology that is supposed to be used in safety critical communication. So instead of saying anything to the person in charge, they said nothing and just relied on the fact that the person in charge knew what it was that they were supposed to be doing. And I think what we can learn here is that there are social inhibitors that can come into play. And this was certainly the findings of the Rail Accident Investigation Board. They found that these social inhibitors were prevalent within the rail industry. And in fact, when they looked more widely at other sectors, they also found the same thing happened in the aviation industry prior to the 1980s. Now, I'm sure you've all worked and either worked within the aviation industry, you've all taken flights, and you've all heard the types of communications that go on between pilots and staff and everything else. And they are very, very scripted. They are very, very clear. And there is no embarrassment about using any of the terminology that's used in the aviation industry. And in fact, it's drilled into all personnel that work in the aviation sector in training and exercises. And in fact, excuse me, now it's the norm to use those dedicated safety-related phrases when having that communication within that sector. So, in fact, not using the appropriate safety critical communication methods is now seen as abnormal practice in the aviation industry. And this is something that wasn't prevalent and isn't prevalent within the rail sector. And it is starting to be addressed now because of incidents like Balham. Now, you could ask, excuse me, why is this relevant to lots of other folks? For example, the tank storage industry. Well, I looked at this and I thought, well, actually, this really is important because there are activities that I carry out within terminal operations which are safety critical. The one which really was brought into my mind was offloading the cargo from a ship through loading arms at a jetty into a tank. And we need to make sure that safety critical communications between the terminal control room, the jetty side operators and the ship are clear, concise and understood. So actually to reinforce this point in a learning brief from the Process Safety Forum about the importance of safety critical communications is absolutely key. Now you may be interested, just whilst we're on the topic of learning briefs and the rail industry, I've only just this morning released a new learning brief from the Process Safety Forum. And this is on the Carmont train accident, which some of you may recall from August 2020. And if you remember that there was a train derailment because of debris on the line near Carmont in Aberdeenshire. And sadly, that resulted in 3 people killed and 6 had a serious injury as a result of this. Following the investigation, it was found that debris had washed out of a 15-metre length steeply sloping drainage trench, and that because the trench had not been installed as per the original design intent. So again, this is a really important learning brief that we can use. And what we've done is we've produced the learning brief to distill some of the key lessons from that deviation from the original design intent, which is something that we should all be cognizant of. And it was also found, by the way, during our investigation of that review, that actually the inspection and maintenance of the new drainage works had not been correctly applied. Network Rail's management processes had not addressed weaknesses in the way it mitigated consequence of extreme rainfall events. And this is very important because when the design was implemented and these drainage ditches were put in place, there was no awareness of what could happen if there was excessive rainfall. And this is particularly relevant now as we talk about climate change. Climate change is inevitable. We probably will see greater volumes of rainfall, greater extremes in temperature, for example, as we go through climate change. And it's very important to think about these lessons and think about these natural hazards, these natural events, and make sure that we have designs in place that are designed appropriately to prevent accidents like this occurring. The other thing that I mentioned that the Process Safety Forum publishes is something called safety alerts. And these are specific alerts that we want to share through the Process Safety Forum's membership on specific pieces of equipment. The one that I want to share with you, you can see on the screen there, and it's actually one that was shared through my sector, through the Tank Storage Association. And it's a very simple one, really. And I'm sure that many of you may be familiar with these things called plenty filters. And they're basically a filter which sits in a process line. And clearly they need to have periodic visual inspections and cleaning. This particular one that you can see on the screen at the moment was in a diesel loading bay. So it was a diesel line. And the filter was there to pick up any particulates in the diesel that was used when it was pumped in and filling up road tankers. The issue was that during the periodic maintenance and inspection of this filter, the top section, the blue section that you see, was replaced after the maintenance and inspection, and there was a slight leak. And unfortunately, what the maintenance operator decided to do was to give the top a bit of a tap with a copper hammer just to try and seal that leak, that weep from the seals, which was fine, and it did stop the leak. Everything was fine, but there was no pressure in the line, obviously, because it was going through an inspection and maintenance. But as soon as the valves to the filter were reopened and the pump started pumping to load road tankers again, the casting broke, the blue part broke. And there was a loss of several hundred litres of diesel to grade. Fortunately, no one was injured, but obviously it was a relatively significant loss of diesel to the ground and into the interceptors in the loading bay. Why is this a relevant safety alert? It's because these types of filters, these plenty filters, are not designed to be tapped with a hammer, copper or wood or any type of hammer. They are designed to be hand tightened only. So really the safety alert was raised to make sure that people understand that these things are hand tight only. And also that if you have a leak, it's probably down to the seal failing, not because you need to over tighten the casing. So it's a very important one to share with Process Safety Forum members, because these types of plenty filters are used in many, many different applications across many, many different sectors. The other thing that I mentioned that we do is we produce things, or we review significant incidents. And the reason we review significant incidents is to try and identify any relevant learnings that we can glean that might be relevant to the Process Safety Forum members. One of the most recent that we've done here is on the recent lessons from the Grenfell Tower accident, the report that Judith Hackett put together. And we went through each one of the recommendations from that Judith Hackett report to determine whether or not there is something that our sectors on Process Safety Forum could learn from that. We don't go through every single incident that happens. Grenfell was obviously a very important and a very significant event that is relevant to us. But I think it would be true to say that we don't go through every single event. We try to identify those that are the most relevant. So for example, in the past, we've looked at the XV230 Nimrod crash that was several years ago now. And we've also looked at Fukushima as well in Japan relatively recently. What we will do is we will produce an incident review where we provide an analysis from each of the recommendations and determine what we as Process Safety Forum need to do with our members. One example of this from the Grenfell review was clearly there was a need that we felt that we needed to, if you like, promote an increased knowledge exchange or learning on management of change. And management of change is something that you are all very aware of and very knowledgeable in. But we felt it was appropriate, because of the nature of the Grenfell incident, that we should produce a knowledge exchange just to strengthen the best practice and highlight where people can find more information about how to carry out management of change effectively. Clearly, I don't want to go into the Grenfell incident itself. It's extremely complex, and it would be remiss of me just to put it down to a failure of management of change, because it was obviously far, far more than that. However, clearly one of the lessons from the Grenfell Tower accident was highlighted when that refurbishment took place and cladding was replaced, and the cladding contractors and the people that commissioned that project failed to understand that this change was a departure from the original design intent for the building. And that is, in essence, a management of change issue. And that's why we created this knowledge exchange. And what we try to do in this knowledge exchange is to highlight things like examples of where we've seen failures in the past. For example, design intent changes. We just mentioned Grenfell, but that was also the case at Flixborough. Piper Alpha were also examples of where the design intent change had not been properly managed. If we look at things like temporary changes not being handled correctly, Bhopal is obviously one of the most clear examples of that. Things like creeping change. Space Shuttle Columbia, good example of where creeping change was not managed effectively, that caused the loss of the shuttle. So we've tried to highlight each one of those incidents in the knowledge exchange to give some people the information about what can go wrong. But as well as that, we've highlighted in this knowledge exchange piece good practice, what we as Process Safety Forum members deem as good practice in terms of management of change. So these will be essential areas such as making sure that we implement and maintain a management of change process for temporary and permanent changes. We need to make sure that we include in the management of change process risk assessment, identification and application of risk reduction measures. And all of these things we reiterate in the document that we encourage people to look at and to read. And perhaps most importantly, at the end of the knowledge exchange or management of change, we include references to further reading where people can find out more information. Because this is all about us distilling our knowledge from the various sectors represented at Process Safety Forum to a much, much wider audience, people that may not be as familiar with management of change as you folks listening today. Businesses that are entering into coma, for example, that have not been subject to the same levels of rigor of safety management systems that they may have been in the past. So it's a very effective method of communicating areas of incidents that have happened in the past, safety alerts that we may have. In terms of resources, so how do we communicate all of these learning briefs and safety alerts and everything else to the wider world and the wider audience? Well, the important thing is have a look at the Process Safety Forum website, which I'll get onto in a moment. But one of the things we do is we publish a newsletter after every Process Safety Forum meeting, which gives a summary of all of the topics that are currently being discussed, any new publications that we've made, or any new publications that one of the linked groups to Process Safety Forum has made. So it's a very, very useful resource to find what are the things that we're currently talking about and what's recently been published. I mentioned the website, there it is, you can see on your screen there. If you go to www.p-s-f.org.uk, you will find the website, and this is, you don't need to register or do anything. And you can see on the screen in the blue text on the right-hand side, links to safety alerts, learning briefs, knowledge exchanges, and incident reviews, and also those newsletters, which I've just shown. And those are all updated as and when we publish new material. It's also worth mentioning that Process Safety Forum website is also the temporary home to other forum outputs from the Chemical and Downstream Oil Industries Forum, which produces guidance on many different technical topics, including things like functional safety, process safety, flood risk, and NARTEC events. And we've also included on our website outputs from the COMA Strategic Forum, which is another forum that we work very closely with. And on there, you can find lots of very valuable information in relation to leadership. That's my presentation done. What I'm going to do now, David, if that's okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. And then if there are any questions that anybody has, then perhaps you can guide me through them.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, thanks so much for that. It's great to understand how much work has been going on in the Process Safety Forum over the years and the connections that you have across the industry. One of the things I mentioned in the introduction to you that perhaps would be interesting for you to expand on is the relationship that you have with the regulators and the wider industry groups. If I was somebody new to process safety, which of those groups would you sort of signal to me or direct me to? So 2 questions for the price of 1. What's the relationship like with the regulators? And then secondly, how would you, send me towards really informative groups that I should be engaging with?
Thank you, David. It's a very good question. I think it's important to understand that really, as I said in my presentation, the relationship of the major hazard sector, in other words, pretty much predominantly those that are governed under COMA regulations, significantly changed after Buncefield. The way in which we relate and we work with our regulators has changed. I would like to say, certainly from a TSA perspective, it's far more collaborative rather than being confrontational. And the way that we try and achieve those working patterns with our regulators now is through groups like the Process Safety Forum, the COMA Strategic Forum, and CDOIF, the Chemical and Downstream Oil Industries Forum. If you are a newcomer into the major accident hazard sector, I would recommend you start by looking at the Process Safety Forum website and the publications that each of those 3 different groups have done, because there is a tremendous amount of work gone into the outputs that those groups do. And to give you an example, we've currently, just an example of output from CDOIF, the Chemical and Downstream Oil Industries Forum, for example. There's been a lot of concern on a technical level about how you go about using IEC 61511, which people might be aware of, which relates to safety instrumented systems, and how you go about demonstrating prior use for equipment that you want to claim credit for in a safety instrumented system. Because there was nothing really well documented to say how you go about doing that and what our regulator, the HSE, would like to see. So I chaired a working group together with the HSE and industry to write guidance about what you need to do. And that guidance was published underneath the CDOIF banner and is freely available to anybody that wants to look at it. And that's just one example. As I said, the COMA Strategic Forum has published lots of guidance on process safety leadership, which is very, very key. For those businesses that are listening into this presentation that are COMA operators, you are probably aware that the HSE have started a series of interventions now on process safety leadership. So it will be a very, very good idea to have a read of the information that is being pushed out from the COMA Strategic Forum on safety leadership, which is available on the PSF website. I think, though, just to finish off answering your question, David, it is absolutely critically important that you engage with IOSH, with ICHEME, and with your relevant sector's trade association, because you'll probably find that they are all working on or represented on each one of these groups, and they can give you updates on what's currently being discussed, what are some of the strategic topics, and what are some of the current concerns that we have.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I had an engagement with the loss prevention bulletin earlier this year. I wrote an article for them looking at response to major incidents. And the response element comes up in the question that we've had posted by Mohammed, who goes back to the example that you gave, the alert regarding the diesel valve problem. And you obviously looked at the operational elements about why the leak occurred and the failure. Did you also look at, excuse me, the implications of that, the spillage and the response to the spillage and the containment mitigation of the events?
Again, a very good question. Thank you to Mohammed for raising this. It is a very good point. And I think this kind of will demonstrate how the Process Safety Forum works. So it was one of my member companies at the TSA that raised this as a safety alert issue that should be shared more widely. And clearly, when my member organisation carried out their own investigation of what happened, they did look at the spill mitigation, and that worked incredibly effectively. There were no issues to report on how they went about mitigating that spill. The spill was contained within the interceptors that were on the loading bay, and it was cleaned up appropriately. So therefore, there was not anything that needed to be communicated more widely through the Process Safety Forum community. It was solely to focus on, think about if you've got these plenty valves and that you don't knock them with a hammer, because that's not what they're designed to do. Clearly, if the spill response had found to be deficient in some way and there were lessons to learn from that, then we would have explained that through another learning brief or safety alert or knowledge exchange piece.
Do you get much feedback on the alerts? And for the learning briefs, do you monitor whether they're actually being implemented through the member organizations, or is it largely a one-way communication sending out?
It's a very challenging question, that one, David. So thank you for asking. It's something that we debate very often within the Process Safety Forum itself. You know, we push all of this information out, but how do we look to see whether or not it's actually making a difference? It is extremely difficult to do that. All we can do is I can talk about it from my perspective as a TSA. So when the Process Safety Forum issues a new safety alert or learning brief or knowledge exchange piece, what we will do with the TSA, we will discuss that within our safety, health and environmental committees or our technical committees to make sure that that learning is pushed out to our member companies. And we also encourage our member companies to use that knowledge exchange or learning brief or safety alert in their own toolbox talks or wherever relevant. So we do push that information out. It's very rare that we have a great deal of information that comes back that says, yes, we used that learning brief and it was very valuable and we learned lessons from it. But I think you'll probably find that many organizations struggle with getting that two-way dialogue. I think what's important is that we regularly get our member companies at TSA, and the same is true from the other trade associations represented on Process Safety Forum. We regularly get input from our member companies. And to me, that says they see value in the knowledge exchange that goes by, because they want to feed in as much information in as we're pushing out.
Okay. Sorry, I always like digging at these things because there isn't an easy answer.
No.
But how do you then manage that information exchange into third parties and contractors? Because I'm pretty sure that the TSA and a lot of your members rely very heavily on third-party contractor interfaces.
Absolutely right, and in fact, it's particularly relevant to our sector on terminal operations, because we have a very small headcount, which you saw from some of my early slides, and you tend not to have the expertise in-house. So you tend not to have human factors specialists, for example, or you may not have functional safety specialists in-house. So you do rely very heavily on third-party consultants and contractors. Certainly the way that we manage it, that's why we have our associate membership program within the TSA. So many of the companies that are members of the TSA are actually equipment suppliers or service providers specifically for our sector. And all of the information that comes out of Process Safety Forum gets shared to those folks as well. And we discuss them in our various different technical committees. And that's true for several of the other trade associations as well. So bodies such as the Chemical Industries Association has something very similar. I think it's difficult. What we try to do in the newsletters, which I mentioned, is we try to give a very high level description of what it is that we're trying to do, and we push that out, and we hope that a lot of the contractors are also picking that information up. I know also that our member companies, so for example, if we took one of our member companies such as the Oil and Pipelines Agency or Exeter or Greenergy, they will also take the outputs from Process Safety Forum, whether that's a safety alert knowledge exchange, and they will push that out to their own contractors if they think it's relevant. So it's almost like a network of pathways that we try and reach out to folks, but we rely heavily on the trade associations and the members of the trade associations to create those networks.
Oh, okay. We have a question from, I'm not sure I've got the full name in front of me, Irvin Shaw. And he's they're asking, what are the incidents that you're looking for in the future? You've already got, I assume, a list of work that you're doing. So what are the upcoming incidents that you're reviewing? And perhaps a little bit more, what are the criteria you used to select those incidents? What attracts you to say there's a learning point here if we go in and research a little bit more?
It's an excellent question. There is nothing on our radar at the moment that is relevant to a very significant incident of the scale of Buncefield or Piper Alpha or Grenfell. In terms of more sector-focused incidents, I can give you one example from the Tank Storage Association. One of our member companies have recently had an incident with regards to a vapor recovery unit, which isn't relevant to lots of other sectors. However, it is relevant because it relates to the packaged equipment and control system that came with that particular equipment and the way in which that's managed and designed and implemented. Yeah. So that's probably going to be the source of a new knowledge exchange that we will adopt as Process Safety Forum, because it will be relevant to any other sector or business that is using packaged equipment. However, we can't do anything with that yet until all of the internal investigations and by the HSE and the business itself have been completed.
So you're right, there's a regulatory hold on some of things that you must have to be very careful.
Yeah, and I think just to finish off answering the question, I think the person also asked about how we go about selecting what's relevant to share through Process Safety Forum, and really that's down to judgment. So I will make a judgment. So one of my member companies will give to me and said, do you think this is relevant to share more widely with lots of other sectors? I'll look at it and say, actually, yeah, because loads of other people are using packaged equipment on skids. So that will be a good one to share with Process Safety Forum. If somebody issued me with a safety alert on a particular diesel additive, for example, that's blended at a terminal, I'll say, well, not really, because the lesson there is specifically to do with the chemicals in the process that you're doing, and it isn't necessarily going to be relevant to other folks. And all of the other trade associations that are members of Process Safety Forum follow the same approach. And as I said at the beginning of my presentation, that's what we have the operational guidance in place for.
Yeah, that's fair. Irvin's come back with an interesting point, taking it on that there's a lot of really good information into alerts and the learnings. Are there any linkages that any of your member states then take back into the competence of individuals? And are there any sort of safety training programs that you've been involved in sponsoring, or other members of the networks that you're aware of to continue to develop safety practitioner knowledge of process safety?
Again, it's a very good question. I think this comes back to these interrelated groups. I've already mentioned the OMA Strategic Forum and CDOIF. There's another one which is a bit of a mouthful, the acronym, but it's the Process Safety Management Competency Project Board. Sorry,
that isn't one I'm aware of.
It isn't one that you're. It's basically it's aligned very closely with Cogent Skills, who you may well have heard of.
Yes,
So
I know
Cogent
Cogent
Skills
well.
is the sector skills body for process industries and lots of other sectors as well. So, you know, we do have linkages from Process Safety Forum into that group, and obviously also at sectoral level. You know, we have our own, for example, we have our own apprenticeship specialism for bulk liquid storage. So any relevant learnings that come out of Process Safety Forum, we would feed into the syllabus for the apprenticeship, the apprenticeship specialism for bulk liquid storage. And I know that lots of other trade associations do something similar with that as well. I think it's important to understand that Process Safety Forum, all of us are volunteers. You know, we're not, we do this for the greater good. So there's the finite amount that we can do, and we rely on the onward networks of our individual trade associations and partner organisations like IOSH and IChemE and Cogent Skills to help propagate the messages that we're sending out.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Peter. Can I just quick reminder to everyone who's listening, the poll has been circulated by the events team. If you could fill that in, it's very, very useful to us. We get an awful lot of very good feedback from that. So please do complete that. And I noticed that the time is now sort of rapidly approaching the 1 o'clock limit. So Peter, it's, I think, over to me to say thank you so much for fielding the questions and for sharing quite a lot of information there. And I've certainly learned quite a lot. And I'm definitely going to look up the link into Cogent and the PSM SCB if I've got the acronym correct. And what I find I'll include in our next newsletter. So again, on behalf of the committee, can I thank everybody who's joined us today and participated. And Peter, can I just thank you again for finding the time in your busy schedule for working with us on this. Is there any last message you'd like to share with us?
No, just to thank you for the opportunity, David. I mean, I speak regularly to colleagues such as Ken Rivers from the IChemE and others, and we are passionate about sharing all of the good stuff that we do, and often it doesn't get the audience that it deserves. So any opportunity that we have to share some of the excellent work that's being done by Process Safety Forum or Coma Strategic Forum or CDOF is always there. And if anybody would like any more information about anything that I've spoken about, I think my email address was on my last slide. So please feel free to contact me at any point. Yeah, and we get a direct feed of all your information as well from one of our committee members. You do indeed, absolutely. And so we do make reference in occasionally through the newsletters and ties. So if any of our members would like to follow up on that, please send me or Alison Nicholson a message and we'll do that. So I think I'll close it today, and so that'll be us leaving. Peter, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you, David. Thank you, IOSH. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks. And thanks, Dimple, for managing us in the background. Cheers. Bye.